The autumn rain pelted against the windows of Sarah Mitchell's modest two-bedroom house in Cedar Falls, Iowa. At 34, she had grown accustomed to the quiet evenings that filled her life since her divorce 2 years ago. The small town, with its population of barely 8,000, offered the kind of peace she desperately needed after the chaos of her marriage's end. Sarah was grading her third-grade students' math homework when she heard the whimpering. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks on her ears, but the sound persisted, a soft, desperate cry that seemed to come from her backyard. "What in the world?" she muttered, setting down her red pen and peering through the kitchen window. The motion sensor light had triggered, illuminating her small backyard with its weathered wooden fence and the old oak tree her ex-husband never got around to trimming. There, huddled beneath the covered patio, was a dog, a beautiful German shepherd, soaking wet and shivering. Sarah's heart immediately went out to the animal. She had always been a dog person, though her ex-husband Mark had insisted they couldn't afford pets. Now, living alone, she had often considered adopting a companion, but never quite found the courage to take that step. She grabbed an old towel from the linen closet and cautiously opened the back door. The dog looked up at her with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to hold both wariness and hope. Despite its bedraggled state, Sarah could tell this was no ordinary stray. The dog's build was impressive. Its coat, though muddy and wet, appeared to be of high quality, and there was something almost regal about its bearing. "Hey there, beautiful," Sarah said softly, crouching down and extending her hand. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" The dog sniffed her hand cautiously, then seemed to make a decision. It moved closer, allowing Sarah to gently towel off its soaking fur. As she did, she noticed something that made her pause. A collar, but not just any collar. It was made of what appeared to be high-quality leather with metal hardware that looked expensive, though she couldn't make out any tags in the dim light. "You're somebody's baby, aren't you?" she whispered, continuing to dry the animal. "Someone's probably worried sick about you." The dog seemed to understand her gentle tone and moved even closer, pressing against her legs. Sarah felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in months, the simple comfort of being needed. "Come on, let's get you inside and warmed up," she said, standing and opening the door wider. The German shepherd hesitated for just a moment before following her into the house. Once inside, Sarah could see the dog more clearly under the kitchen lights. It was a male, she realized, and despite being wet and muddy, he was clearly well cared for. His teeth were clean, his nails trimmed, and his muscle tone suggested regular exercise and good nutrition. "Someone spent a lot of money on you, didn't they, boy?" Sarah said, kneeling down to examine the collar more closely. The collar bore no visible identification, but the craftsmanship was extraordinary. The leather was supple and expertly stitched, and the metal components had an almost military precision to them. What caught her attention most, however, was a small rectangular device attached to the collar that she initially mistook for a name tag. Upon closer inspection, it looked more like some kind of electronic component. "Probably a GPS tracker," she reasoned aloud. "Your family must be looking for you right now." The dog sat patiently as she examined him, his intelligent eyes never leaving her face. There was something almost human about his gaze, as if he understood every word she was saying. Sarah went to her pantry and found a can of chicken she had been saving for a recipe. She opened it and placed it in a bowl, along with a bowl of fresh water. The dog approached the food cautiously, sniffed it, then looked back at her as if asking permission. "Go ahead, sweetheart. You must be starving." He ate with remarkable restraint, not gulping down the food as she might have expected from a lost, hungry animal. His manners were impeccable, pausing occasionally to look up at her with what seemed like gratitude. As the dog ate, Sarah tried to make sense of the situation. Cedar Falls wasn't exactly on any major travel routes. People didn't usually pass through with expensive, well-trained German shepherds unless they lived in the area. But she knew most of the dog owners in town, at least by sight, and she had never seen this beautiful animal before. She decided to call the local animal control office, though she knew they were closed at this hour. She left a message on their answering machine, describing the dog and her contact information. She also made a mental note to post on the town's Facebook community page first thing in the morning. "Well, buddy," she said, sitting down on her kitchen floor next to the dog, who had finished eating and was now lying contentedly near her feet. "Looks like you'll be staying here tonight. I hope whoever's looking for you knows you're safe." The dog rested his large head on her lap, and Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of companionship that went beyond words. She gently stroked his head, marveling at how soft his fur was now that it had dried. "You know what? I'm going to call you Max for tonight," she said. "You look like a Max." As if responding to his temporary name, the dog's tail gave a gentle wag. Sarah spent the next hour making a comfortable bed for Max in her living room, using old blankets and pillows. She even brought down her heating pad, setting it on low beneath the blankets to ensure he stayed warm through the night. As she prepared for bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that Max was no ordinary lost pet. Everything about him, from his perfect training to his expensive collar, to his almost uncanny intelligence, suggested he came from a world very different from her simple life in Cedar Falls. Before turning off the lights, she took one more look at Max, who was lying peacefully on his makeshift bed, watching her with those remarkable eyes. "Sweet dreams, Max," she whispered. "Tomorrow we'll find your family." But as Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, she had no idea that Max wasn't just any dog, and that by morning, her quiet life in Cedar Falls would be changed forever. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away any traces of where Max had come from, or how he had found his way to Sarah's backyard. In the distance, barely audible over the storm, the sound of vehicles could be heard moving slowly through the town's empty streets, their occupants searching methodically through the night. The search for Max had already begun, but Sarah slept peacefully, unaware that she was now at the center of something far bigger than a simple case of a lost pet. Sarah woke to the sound of her coffee maker's automatic timer clicking on at 6:30 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 2 years. But this morning was different. Instead of the usual silence that greeted her in her empty house, she heard the soft padding of feet on her hardwood floors. "Max?" she called softly, remembering her unexpected houseguest. The German Shepherd appeared in her bedroom doorway, alert and beautiful in the morning light streaming through her windows. His coat had dried to a lustrous golden brown, and his intelligent dark eyes seemed even more striking than they had the night before. "Good morning, handsome," Sarah said, sitting up in bed. "How did you sleep?" Max approached her bed and sat perfectly at attention, his posture straight and dignified. Sarah was struck again by his remarkable training. This was clearly a dog who had received professional instruction. She got dressed quickly in her weekend clothes, jeans and a soft blue sweater, and headed to the kitchen with Max following close behind. While her coffee brewed, she opened another can of chicken for Max and refilled his water bowl. "Okay, boy, let's see if we can figure out where you belong," she said, pulling out her laptop and settling at her small dining table. She opened Facebook and navigated to the Cedar Falls community page, where neighbors regularly posted about everything from lost cats to recommendations for local contractors. She began typing a post about finding Max, but paused when she looked over at him. The dog was sitting by her front window, not looking out at the quiet street, but rather staring intently at the sky. His ears were perked forward, and there was a tension in his body that hadn't been there the night before. "What is it, Max? Do you hear something?" Sarah joined him at the window and followed his gaze upward. The morning sky was clear after the previous night's rain, painted in soft pastels of pink and gold. She couldn't see or hear anything unusual, but Max remained fixed in his position, as if waiting for something. She returned to her laptop and finished her Facebook post. Found. Beautiful German Shepherd. Male, well-trained, wearing expensive leather collar. Found in my backyard last night during the storm. Very well cared for. Someone is definitely missing this boy. Please share. Contact Sarah Mitchell if you recognize him. She was about to hit post when Max suddenly stood up, his ears perked even higher. Now Sarah could hear it too, a distant rhythmic sound that was growing steadily louder. "Is that?" she began, then stopped as the sound became unmistakable. It was the distinctive whop 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 of helicopter rotors. Cedar Falls rarely saw helicopter traffic. The nearest hospital was 40 miles away in Cedar Rapids, and medical helicopters typically flew a different route. Sarah moved to her front door and stepped onto her small porch, Max immediately joining her. The sound was definitely getting closer, and Max was now visibly agitated, pacing back and forth on the porch, his eyes fixed on the sky. "What's wrong, boy?" Sarah asked, but even as she spoke, she felt a growing uneasiness in her stomach. The helicopter appeared over the tree line at the edge of town, flying low and moving in a deliberate search pattern. It was black, sleek, and clearly military or law enforcement in design. As it drew closer, Sarah could see it was much larger and more sophisticated than any police helicopter she had ever seen. Max began to whine, a sound that was part excitement and part distress. He looked up at Sarah, then back at the helicopter, as if trying to communicate something urgent. The aircraft made a wide circle over the town center, then began moving in their direction. Sarah's heart began to race as she realized it was heading directly toward her neighborhood. "This can't be about you, can it, Max?" she whispered, but the dog's behavior suggested otherwise. The helicopter slowed as it approached her street, hovering for a moment over the houses 2 blocks away, then moving closer. Sarah watched in disbelief as it finally stopped directly above her small yard, the rotor wash bending the branches of her oak tree and sending leaves swirling across her lawn. Max was now barking, not in fear, but in what sounded almost like recognition. The helicopter began to descend, clearly intending to land in her backyard. Sarah's mind raced. Her yard was small, barely large enough for the aircraft, but somehow the pilot was managing to bring it down with precision that spoke of extensive training. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, backing toward her front door. "Max, what have you gotten me into?" But Max wasn't following her. Instead, he had jumped down from the porch and was running toward the backyard, his tail wagging furiously. Sarah stood frozen on her porch as the helicopter touched down in her yard with surprising gentleness. The engines began to wind down, and she could see figures moving inside the aircraft through its tinted windows. Her quiet Saturday morning in Cedar Falls had just taken a turn she never could have imagined. Whatever was happening, it was clear that Max was no ordinary lost dog, and that she had somehow stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. As the helicopter's rotors slowed to a stop, Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her coffee mug. Through her kitchen window, she could see uniformed figures emerging from the aircraft, but she couldn't make out their faces clearly. Max had reached the backyard and was jumping up against the fence, his excitement palpable even from a distance. One of the figures from the helicopter was approaching the fence, and Sarah could hear a man's voice, though she couldn't make out the words over the distance and the residual noise from the helicopter. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had sent, "Sarah, what on earth is happening over there? There's a helicopter in your yard." Before she could respond, her doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath and trying to calm her racing heart, Sarah walked to her front door. Through the peephole, she could see a man in what appeared to be a military uniform, standing at attention on her porch. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore his uniform with the kind of precision that spoke of years of disciplined service. Sarah opened the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice respectful but official. "I'm Colonel James Harrison, United States Army. I believe you have something that belongs to us." Sarah's mouth went dry. I found a dog," she managed to say. "Yes, ma'am. His name is actually Rex, and he's a very special dog. May I come in and explain the situation?" Sarah looked past the colonel toward her backyard, where she could see Max, Rex, being enthusiastically greeted by other uniformed personnel. The joy in the dog's reunion was evident even from this distance. Is he in trouble?" "Am I in trouble?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Colonel Harrison's stern expression softened slightly. "No, ma'am. Neither of you is in any trouble. In fact, we owe you a debt of gratitude. Rex is a highly trained military working dog, and he's been missing for over 18 hours. We've been searching for him all night." Sarah slowly unlatched the chain and opened the door fully. "Please come in, Colonel Harrison. I think I need to sit down." As the colonel stepped into her modest living room, Sarah realized that her life was about to intersect with a world she had never imagined. A world where dogs were trained for missions she couldn't begin to fathom, and where helicopters landed in suburban backyards to retrieve them. But even as the official explanation began, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to this story than a simple case of a lost military dog. Colonel Harrison sat carefully on Sarah's modest sofa, his posture remaining military straight even in the informal setting. Sarah took the chair across from him, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug for comfort and warmth. "Ms. Mitchell," the colonel began, "before I explain about Rex, I need to ask you some questions. Did anyone else see him? Did you tell anyone about finding him?" "I left a message with Animal Control, but they're closed on weekends," Sarah replied. "And I was about to post on our community Facebook page when—" She gestured toward the window where the black helicopter sat in her backyard like something from a movie. "Good. That's very good." Colonel Harrison pulled out a small notepad. "Ms. Mitchell, what I'm about to tell you is classified information. Rex isn't just any military working dog. He's part of a highly specialized program that trains dogs for sensitive operations, the kind of operations that require the utmost discretion." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of operations?" "The kind I can't discuss in detail, but I can tell you that Rex has been trained to detect things that ordinary dogs cannot. His nose is worth more than most people make in a decade, and his training represents years of investment and expertise." Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see Rex with what appeared to be his handler, a younger man in fatigues, who was running his hands over the dog, clearly checking for injuries. The reunion was touching, but Sarah noticed that even in this moment of relief, the military personnel maintained their professional alertness. "How did he end up in my yard?" Sarah asked. "Cedar Falls is hardly a hotbed of military activity." Colonel Harrison's expression grew more serious. "Rex was being transported to a facility in Chicago when our vehicle was involved in an accident during last night's storm. A semi-truck ran a red light and hit our transport van about 15 miles north of here. Rex's crate was damaged in the impact, and in the confusion and rain, he managed to get out and disappear into the woods." "Oh my God, was anyone hurt?" "Minor injuries only, thankfully. But Rex bolted into the storm, and we've been searching for him ever since. We had tracking teams with helicopters combing the area all night." Sarah remembered the collar and the small electronic device she had noticed. "He has some kind of tracker, doesn't he?" "On his collar?" "Yes, but it was damaged in the accident. We were getting intermittent signals, but nothing we could pinpoint accurately." The colonel leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Mitchell, the fact that Rex came to you, that he trusted you enough to let you help him, that says something about your character. These dogs are trained to be extremely cautious around strangers." Sarah felt a warmth at the compliment, but also a growing sadness as she realized that Rex would be leaving with these men. In less than 24 hours, she had grown attached to the intelligent, gentle animal. "Can I ask you something, Colonel?" Sarah said. "What makes Rex so special? I mean, I could tell he was well trained, but he seemed almost human in his intelligence." Colonel Harrison was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Rex is part of a program that selects dogs with exceptional natural abilities and enhances those abilities through intensive training. He can detect trace amounts of certain substances that even our most advanced equipment can't pick up. He's been deployed in situations where lives depended on his abilities." "What kinds of substances?" "I'm sorry, Ms. Mitchell, but that's classified." The colonel stood up. "What I can tell you is that Rex has helped prevent several incidents that could have resulted in significant loss of life. He's not just a military asset. He's a hero." Through the window, Sarah watched as Rex was being led toward the helicopter. Even from this distance, she could see the dog looking back toward the house, and her heart ached. "Colonel Harrison, can I say goodbye to him?" The colonel's stern expression softened completely for the first time since he'd arrived. "Of course. In fact, I think Rex would like that very much." They walked together to Sarah's backyard, where the helicopter crew was preparing for departure. Up close, Sarah could see that these weren't ordinary soldiers. Their equipment was more sophisticated, their bearing more intense, and there was an alertness about them that spoke of specialized training. Rex immediately pulled toward Sarah when he saw her, his tail wagging furiously. His handler, A sergeant whose name tape read Collins smiled and allowed the dog to approach her. "He really took to you, ma'am," Sergeant Collins said. "That's unusual for Rex. He's typically very reserved with civilians." Sarah knelt down and wrapped her arms around Rex's neck, burying her face in his soft fur. "I'm going to miss you, beautiful boy," she whispered. "Take care of yourself." Rex seemed to understand that this was goodbye. He pressed against her, then looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes, as if trying to memorize her face. "Ma'am," Colonel Harrison said quietly, "I want you to know that what you did matters. Finding Rex, caring for him, keeping him safe, it's more important than you realize." Sarah stood up, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Will I ever see him again?" "I can't make any promises about that," the colonel replied honestly. "But I can promise you that Rex will never forget what you did for him, and neither will we." As the helicopter crew prepared for takeoff, Colonel Harrison handed Sarah a business card. "Ms. Mitchell, if you ever need anything at all, you call this number. We don't forget our friends." Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. Rex was led to the helicopter, but just before he was helped inside, he broke free from his handler and ran back to Sarah. He sat at her feet and placed his paw on her leg, looking up at her one more time. "Go on, Rex," she said softly. "Go do your important work." As if he understood, Rex returned to Sergeant Collins and allowed himself to be helped into the aircraft. Sarah stood in her backyard, watching as the helicopter lifted off, carrying Rex back to a world of classified missions and national security. As the aircraft disappeared over the tree line, she felt both loss and a strange sense of pride. She had played a small part in something important, something that mattered in ways she might never fully understand. The quiet teacher from Cedar Falls had, for one brief moment, been connected to something larger than herself. But as she walked back into her empty house, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of her story with Rex. Somehow, she sensed that their paths would cross again. She was more right than she could have imagined. 3 months had passed since the helicopter landed in Sarah's backyard, and life in Cedar Falls had returned to its familiar rhythm. Sarah had gone back to teaching her third graders, grading papers, and spending quiet evenings in her small house. But something had changed in those months. She no longer felt quite as alone as she once had. The memory of Rex, and the brief glimpse into a world of purpose and importance, had awakened something in Sarah. She had begun volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends, helping to care for abandoned and lost pets. It wasn't the same as having Rex, but it filled a void she hadn't fully understood was there. On this particular Saturday morning in January, Sarah was at the shelter helping to bathe a nervous rescue terrier when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it seemed official. "Hello, Ms. Mitchell? This is Colonel Harrison. We met a few months ago." Sarah's heart immediately began racing. "Colonel Harrison, yes, I remember. Is everything all right? Is Rex okay?" "Rex is fine, Ms. Mitchell. Better than fine, actually. But I'm calling because we have a situation, and we need your help." Sarah sat down heavily on a bench in the shelter's bathing area. "My help? I don't understand." "Ms. Mitchell, can you be available tomorrow morning? I'd like to come speak with you in person. It's important, and it's something that requires discretion." Of course, but can you tell me what this is about?" "It's about Rex, and it's about a debt we need to repay. I'll explain everything tomorrow." That night, Sarah could barely sleep. Her mind raced with possibilities, most of them worrying. Had something happened to Rex? Was she in some kind of trouble she didn't understand? The next morning, she was startled by the sound of vehicles pulling into her driveway. Looking out her front window, she saw not the military helicopter she had expected, but 2 black SUVs. Colonel Harrison emerged from the first vehicle, but he wasn't alone. With him was Sergeant Collins, Rex's handler, and 2 other men in civilian clothes. But it was the figure emerging from the second SUV that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Rex. The beautiful German shepherd looked exactly as she remembered him. Alert, intelligent, and magnificent. But there was something different about him now. A confidence and bearing that spoke of important work accomplished. Sarah opened her front door and stepped onto her porch just as Rex spotted her. The dog immediately pulled toward her, his tail wagging so hard his entire body seemed to vibrate with joy. "Rex!" Sarah called out, and the dog broke free from Sergeant Collins, bounding across her small front yard and launching himself into her arms. Sarah buried her face in his fur, feeling tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks. "I missed you so much, beautiful boy," she whispered. Colonel Harrison approached, and Sarah could see that his usually stern expression was softer than she remembered. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "we need to talk." Once inside, the colonel explained the reason for their visit. Rex had successfully completed a mission that had prevented a terrorist attack on a major metropolitan area. His ability to detect trace amounts of explosives had led to the discovery and defusal of multiple devices that could have killed hundreds of people. "Rex is a hero, Ms. Mitchell," Colonel Harrison said. "But here's the thing. After the mission, Rex began exhibiting signs of stress and depression. Our veterinary psychologists determined that he was suffering from separation anxiety." "Separation anxiety?" "From you, Ms. Mitchell. Rex formed a bond with you during those crucial hours when he was lost and vulnerable. In all our years of training military working dogs, we've never seen anything quite like it." Sarah looked down at Rex, who was lying contentedly at her feet, his head resting on her shoes. "What does that mean?" she asked. Sergeant Collins spoke up. "Ma'am, Rex has been having difficulty focusing on his work. He's still an incredible dog, but he's been searching, looking for something, or someone." Colonel Harrison leaned forward. "Ms. Mitchell, Rex has served his country with distinction, but he's earned his retirement, and he's made it very clear where he wants to spend that retirement." Sarah's heart began to race. "Are you saying—" "We're asking if you would be willing to adopt Rex permanently. He would be yours, free and clear, with all his medical expenses covered by the military for the rest of his life." Sarah stared at the colonel in disbelief. "You want me to adopt Rex? We want Rex to be happy, and it's clear that happiness for him means being with you." Sarah looked down at Rex, whose intelligent brown eyes were watching her intently, as if he understood every word being spoken. But Colonel Harrison wasn't finished. "There's more, Ms. Mitchell. Rex's handler, Sergeant Collins, is being transferred to a training facility in Iowa City, about an hour from here. He's been working with Rex for 3 years, and saying goodbye is difficult for him too." Sergeant Collins nodded. "Ma'am, I was wondering if it would be possible for me to visit Rex occasionally, to see how he's doing." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the generosity and trust these men were showing her. "Of course, Sergeant Collins, you'd be welcome any time. There's one more thing," Colonel Harrison said, reaching into his briefcase. "The military has a program for retired working dogs and their new families. We'd like to offer you a position as a civilian contractor, helping to evaluate and place other retired military dogs in appropriate homes." He handed her an official-looking document. "It would be part-time work that you could do in addition to your teaching. It pays well, and it would allow you to help other dogs like Rex transition to civilian life." Sarah looked around her living room at these men, who had appeared in her life like something from a dream. 3 months ago, she had been a lonely, divorced teacher in a small Iowa town. Now she was being offered not just the dog she had fallen in love with, but a chance to be part of something meaningful and important. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes, Ms. Mitchell," Colonel Harrison replied with a smile. "Rex has already made his choice." As if on cue, Rex stood up and placed his head in Sarah's lap, looking up at her with complete trust and love. "Yes," Sarah said, her voice stronger now. "Yes to all of it." 6 months later, on a warm summer evening, Sarah sat on her back porch watching Rex play in the yard that had once seemed too small and empty. The same yard where a military helicopter had landed, changing both their lives forever. Sergeant Collins, who now insisted she call him Mike, was visiting for the weekend, and he and Rex were engaged in a spirited game of fetch. Sarah had just finished reviewing applications from families wanting to adopt retired military dogs, work that had brought unexpected fulfillment to her life. Her house no longer felt empty. Rex had filled it with purpose, companionship, and love. The part-time work with the military dog placement program had connected her with people from all over the country, expanding her world in ways she never could have imagined. As the sun set over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Rex trotted over to Sarah and settled beside her chair, content and at peace. "Who would have thought," Sarah said, scratching behind Rex's ears, "that taking care of a lost dog would lead to all this?" Rex looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes that had captured her heart from the very first night. And Sarah knew that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest acts of kindness. In the distance, she could hear the sound of her neighbors' children playing in their yards, the peaceful sounds of a small-town evening. But Sarah knew now that peace was something that had to be protected, and that heroes came in all forms, sometimes with 4 legs and a wet nose. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that stormy night when a lost dog had appeared in her backyard. She had gained not just a companion, but a purpose, a community, and a reminder that the world was full of good people doing important work, often in ways that would never make headlines. Rex pressed closer against her leg, and Sarah smiled, knowing that some bonds transcend explanation. They had found each other when they both needed it most, and in saving each other, they had discovered that the most meaningful connections often come from the most unexpected places. The story that had begun with a simple act of compassion had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a reminder that in a world that often seemed chaotic and uncertain, there was still room for kindness, loyalty, and love.